The NFL regular season is over. The playoffs are underway. Welcome into the No Coast Bias NFL podcast. I'm Farzin Vasugian, joined along with Danny and Robert. Guys, how's it going? Thanks for coming on again.
Good. Pretty good.
You guys ready to talk some NFL playoffs?
Oh, yeah.
Hard to believe it's...
Well, according to Nate, it would be the real regular season. Everything we just went through.
Man.
The preseason.
I'd love to hear Nate's comments because he did call it the second half of the preseason for the Pats, but not really a good second half of the preseason, if that's what you want to call it. But hopefully we'll hear from Nate. He's been pretty busy, hasn't had a chance to do the podcast with us. But nonetheless, got a lot to talk about. We're going to give our NFL awards in this edition of our No Coast Bias NFL podcast. We'll also, of course, give our picks as we do each and every week. We'll have all four games for you on this podcast. We'll also touch on some of the NFL firings that we've had so far. There's going to be more to come soon, and you never know. There might even be a playoff team that ends up following suit in these. There are surprises from time to time. When we least expect, there are already a couple of surprises in coaches staying. One even got retained for an extension. So we'll touch on that shortly. But let's go back for just one moment and look at Week 17 of the NFL season. The Broncos won the AFC West and got the number one Patriots list the second half of the season. Texans and Vikings both won their divisions this past week as well. The Colts missing it, and the Packers they've fallen quite a bit lately, and now they're a wild card team, so still in the playoffs. And let's not forget the Packers, when they won a Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers, it was as a wild card team. The Steelers also got a little bit of help. Fitzpatrick, he kind of threw that game away against the Bills, and just a really terrible second half for the Jets. But nonetheless, the Steelers took advantage and are in. I'll start with you, Danny. What stood out to you the most from Week 17 and all these playoff implications and everything that unfolded for the playoffs?
You know, the AFC, I kind of, that one was definitely, the matchups that came down to the wire, really came down to the wire and entertained. The fact that the Bills and the Jets game was so tight throughout, and the Bills ended up coming in and winning and allowing the Steelers to come into the playoffs, and kind of what we talked about last week with the Steelers probably being arguably the most dominant offense in the playoffs right now, along with one of the worst defenses in the playoffs right now. So that's gonna be really interesting matchup wise throughout, depending on how far they go. But just the way the Bills beat the Jets, I really kind of enjoyed that matchup.
Robert, what about you?
The sort of the Vikings physically dominating the Packers, not exactly a surprise, and then solidifying themselves into a home matchup with the Seahawks, who blew them out, I believe, a month and a half ago. So really winning the NFC North, but possibly losing a matchup, you get yourself a home playoff game, and also probably cementing the Packers as a team really that no one's going to believe in, and for good reason. I mean, Green Bay's broken, honestly. We talked about it last week. They didn't really show up against Arizona and against Minnesota. It wasn't domination by Minnesota. They were just listless. Aaron Rodgers has continued to insist that they're going to show up when everything's on the line. I don't see it, and both NFC North teams, not as a spoiler, will probably have a tough time in the upcoming Wild Card weekend.
That last play though in the Packers game, Aaron Rodgers, look, he did it before against the Lions, which was this season. I actually thought Aaron Rodgers was going to do it again against the Vikings. If you look at that pass, he actually did hit somebody in the hands. I don't think it was a Packers receiver. It might have been a Vikings defender, but hey, look, the defense is they're not trying to get an interception there. They just want to bat it down. So he did hit the hands of somebody there. I don't know why. Aaron Rodgers, it's not really good. The trajectory, the pass, you got to throw in those Hail Marys. Not simple, but Aaron Rodgers just has a knack for it. I'll tell you one thing. The thing that stood out to me the most, and I'll kind of go back to Week 16 a bit, the Denver Broncos going into that Monday Night Football game against the Bengals, had they lost that game, and if they lost to the Chargers and had the Chiefs who did win, not only would they have lost the AFC West, they would have been completely knocked out of the playoffs. So the Broncos were in a situation going into Monday Night Football where they got the number one seed or could have completely missed the playoffs, or somewhere in between. So kind of a weird situation to be in, and I guess that just shows you how close the AFC and not I would say the NFC is somewhat close, not as much, because we saw two teams with really stout records in the Panthers and the Cardinals, which we'll get to later. But guys, the AFC, sure, the Broncos are the number 1 seed, but to me there is no clear-cut true number 1 team, is there? Because let's face it, the number 1 seed in the AFC, they don't even know who their quarterback is. They haven't announced a starting quarterback yet. Sure, Peyton Manning came back and they started doing much better. The Chargers, they guessed wrong on those blitzes there in the running game, but quite honestly, I just don't know if there is a clear-cut number 1 team in the AFC. Robert, would you agree with that?
Yeah, the AFC is wide open. I noted it myself. In the NFC, I think you guys would agree, it's the Cardinals, Panthers, and Seahawks, and really nobody else. While the AFC, I think it probably comes down to, you noted it, the Broncos. The Broncos don't have their own quarterback. It's going to come down to who's healthy. If the Broncos, for example, pick Peyton Manning, he's going to look great handing the ball off, really sparking the team, handing the ball off to C.J. Anderson and Ronnie Hillman, but they haven't played well in recent weeks, despite the wins they've had. And while teams that are healthy, and I'm sure you would love to note it, Farzine, like Kansas City, for example, is one of the healthier teams in the league. Sans Jamal Charles, obviously, since week 5 or 6. I'm not. Don't quote me on when he tore his ACL. New England's going to get all their guys back: Julian Edelman, Chandler Jones, Gerard Mayo, a few guys on the Jamie Collins. In the AFC, there's no juggernaut. It's going to be who has most of their star or depth players.
Well, see, it's funny because a lot of fans will use injury as an excuse, but quite honestly, all of these AFC teams, they've suffered injuries. The Texans they used their 4th quarterback of the season. The Chiefs, as you noted, and the Steelers are without their all-star running backs. We already touched on the Broncos and the Patriots situations. Who else am I forgetting? I know I'm forgetting one other team.
Bengals?
Oh, the Bengals. Yeah, of course, A.J. McCarron, which we'll touch on later. So it's not like there's really, this is an even playing field if you want to use injury as an excuse, isn't it, Danny?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, outside of, I guess I would say the 4 teams in the AFC that are playing on Wild Card weekend are all pretty beat up, and out of the teams playing this weekend, I think you have to give the edge to Kansas City. I mean, you got A.J. McCarron, who's starting for Cincy this weekend, which actually the Steelers snuck into the playoffs, needed some help to get there, and they're actually the favorite this weekend in Vegas by 2.5 points. The Houston quarterback problems are obviously well documented. They're without running backs. Everybody's just kind of limping their way into the playoffs. The Chiefs, meanwhile, are on is it 10 now? 10-game win streak.
10 games, yeah.
Get into the playoffs, and so depending on how that all shakes out, I mean, you look at the teams with the first round bye in New England and Denver, and they're obviously in the best shape. New England's going to be getting some of their players back, like we said. Denver, it looks like Peyton Manning's probably going to start by the time they play in a week and a half, and so you got the 1 and 2 seeds in the AFC that I think have to be the favorite. Out of the wild card weekend, though, I think you gotta at least look at the Chiefs as the one, I don't know, realistic chance of sneaking into the AFC Championship.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, everyone's dealt with injuries, and all of these teams are here, but the Chiefs have seemed to manage it the best. And let's not forget, Justin Houston, who's been practicing more lately, there's a chance he could come back, who, of course, had 22 sacks last year, a monster season for him. And Tom Mahaly did play a little bit. Kansas City's defense, it's those 2 guys right there. Without those 2 guys, you really don't have that elite defense. So we'll touch on all that later. Let's switch to the NFC side for just a moment. I mentioned, there is a clear-cut number 1 and number 2. Sure, the seedings are there, but I think in our minds, a lot of us, we may have interchangeable thoughts with number 1 and number 2 and the Panthers and the Cardinals. But then you've got some teams in there in the mix. Sure, the Redskins, I mean, they kind of had an interesting season with a really bad division, but hey, they won 9 games, which, 9 games is usually the reasonable amount of wins a team usually has to get into the playoffs. Probably not to win a division, but hey, you just got to take advantage with a bad division and do what you got to do. As far as the Vikings and the Packers, that of course came down to the wire, and the Seahawks. I mean, they really turned their season around after a crazy slow start. Rob, I'm going to give this to you, Robert. What do you like about the NFC going into this weekend?
Going in this weekend, the Cardinals didn't look good against Seattle in Week 17, sort of letting them, well, not letting them, Seattle took complete control, but I like Seattle. Danny was noting as the Kansas City's the possible dark horse at a wild card weekend. I mean, Seattle's the clear-cut NFC team. That's not one of the higher seeds that can make a run. This is a team that's been in the Super Bowl two years in a row. I don't think winning in Arizona or Carolina is necessarily an issue for them. I don't think winning in Minnesota is necessarily an issue for them. They're running on all cylinders. They're winning in a way that they haven't before with the passing game, and now they're going to have Marshawn Lynch healthy and back for against Minnesota. Russell Wilson's playing at the highest level of his career. The defense has taken steps back as opposed to what they've been in the past few years, but they're still one of the best in the league. I mean, the pedigree's there. Seattle is the team that people should fear. That's why I said that Minnesota, in essence, probably might have lost by beating Green Bay and getting that home playoff game, because you're playing the hottest team, maybe the hottest team in the league, other than the Kansas City Chiefs.
What about you, Danny? What do you think about the NFC?
You know, I really agree fully with the Seahawks coming out of the NFC in terms of wild card weekend. You got Minnesota and Green Bay, who had a pretty fantastic battle here in Week 17, but neither of them looked particularly good in that matchup. And then you got Seattle, who just blew out Arizona by 30 points. And if you'd asked me, and we probably did a week ago, about Arizona and how they've been performing, I would have argued that they were, the best team in the NFC, and then to see that happen. But like you said, Robert, they are arguably the hottest team in the NFC and maybe in the NFL right now, alongside Kansas City. So to see what they did to, in my opinion, one of the top teams in the NFL was just crazy to see. And so, early on in the season, the first 6-7 weeks, we were kind of laughing at the Seahawks and saying, man, they're not even going to make the playoffs. Now, not only did they sneak into the playoffs, but they're possibly the scariest team in the playoffs right now, the way they've been playing, the way that, it used to be the Marshawn Lynch show and ground and pound football, and now it's throw 5 touchdowns a week and making Jermaine Kearse and the other receiver up there that's got like 10 touchdowns. What's that? Doug Baldwin, yeah. Making those guys look like all-stars. It's a completely different brand of football, but it doesn't seem to be a fluke. They've done it 6 or 7 or 8 weeks in a row now, and I think it's a pretty scary team for anybody to play against, let alone if you got a Week 1 bye.
Thinking of the Seahawks, they kind of remind me of the Golden State Warriors from the 2007 playoffs when they upset the Dallas Mavericks, who were the number 1 seed. I mean, the Golden State Warriors, and I don't want to touch too much into this, but they kind of had a shaky regular season. They got hot at the end when they needed to the most, and next thing you know, in the playoffs, they, of course, pull off the stunner against the Mavericks and move on. And my point is, in any sport, when you enter the playoffs with a hot hand, regardless of whether you're a wild card team or a division winner, the team with the hot hand, they're usually the more dangerous team. I mean, they're probably the ones that usually come away with the upsets and take down the best teams in there. Now, we'll get into our predictions later, and we'll see what we all think and if we're going to follow suit with some of these thoughts and think that they will carry over to the playoffs. But, guys, there are, of course, some teams not going to the playoffs this year. Some NFL firings taking place. Black Sunday, Black Monday, whatever you want to call it now. I mean, some of these coaches, a lot of these coaches are notified on Sundays, but back in the day before social media and quick news updates, we did not know about this until picking up the paper on a Monday morning. So I guess that's where the term kind of came from. But nowadays, these coaches are notified right away, already before the end of the season. The Dolphins, the Titans, and Eagles respectively got rid of Joe Philbin, Ken Wisenhunt, and Chip Kelly. Jim Tomsula from the 49ers and Mike Pettin from the Browns also fired this week. Chuck Pagano, surprisingly to a lot of people, he got an extension. A lot of us thought that he'd be gone. Mike McCoy, another person who thought that he would have been a casualty, he's reportedly going to stay with the Chargers, so another surprise there. some anticipations on the road. I mean, some owners and general managers are still meeting. You never know with the Lions and Jim Caldwell. Jason Garrett and the Cowboys certainly had a disappointing season, and then also another disappointing season in the Saints with Sean Payton as their head coach. Robert, I'm going to let you run the table on this one. Where do you want to start here?
I'm surprised by the coaches that didn't get fired. Most notably, Mike McCoy. Sean Payton, for example, really wanted to go to California because his daughter, I believe, goes to school there. So the Chargers are leaving themselves with, in my mind, a mediocre coach. I mean, the Chargers were decimated by injuries, but I don't think Mike McCoy is necessarily anything. I think they need a new energy, especially probably in all likelihood moving to a new city. There's really no one better. Why would you not want your former All-Pro quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, in Philip Rivers, to work with Sean Payton? And I'm sure Danny's happy about this because Sean Payton's rumored to be the top suitor for the 49ers, even despite all the likely ego battles Jed York would have with Payton. But yeah, that was really surprising to me. I don't know why the Chargers aren't moving in a new direction.
I've got to say, I'm not surprised so much with Chuck Pagano staying. Now, an extension. Now, I have to admit, I wasn't too familiar with. I don't know if his contract was up. I don't think it was because there were reports that he was going to be fired. If his contract was up, then they just simply were not going to retain him, which is a huge difference from getting fired. But to me, there were all these reports that Chuck Pagano was going to get let go unless the Colts made the playoffs. Which, by the way, they did have some help, but still needed a couple more in Week 17. But nonetheless, Chuck Pagano won 11 games in each of his first 3 years. He has one bad season. And look, if you want to call it a bad season, it was an 8-8 record with tons of injuries. You had the quarterback go down, you had the backup quarterback go down, so you went to the backup of the backup, still finished with 8 wins. I don't know why you would want to fire Chuck Pagano just for one. I don't want to say a bad year because, again, 8-8 is not terrible, but I know it's below expectations for the Colts. I'm not too surprised by this. Are any of you guys?
I'm not surprised per se. I think that the reason that rumor was so strong was because of the expectation, right? It was the way that Indy had been doing the last 3 years, and Andrew Luck's only getting bigger and better, and he's going to be the best quarterback in the NFL, and he was praised coming into this season as one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the league, and they're going to do insane things, and it was really just a letdown versus the expectations, right? And he did get hurt, and then he came back and then got hurt again, and so you got kind of a scapegoat, so I'm not really surprised that he is still around. I was surprised more at how strong it seemed the chances were and how everybody was expecting him to be gone, so that was one of the stranger things to me.
Danny, as a 49ers fan, I'm just kind of curious on your input. It seems like this is something interesting that I've noticed more and more lately. Generally, the rule is once you get to your 3rd year as a head coach with a franchise, that's your expected year to do well. Some of these head coaches, honestly, are not even being given 3 full years. I mean, sure, Chip Kelly technically got 3 years. He was just 1 week short of finishing his 3 years with the Eagles. But a lot of these coaches are gone after 2, even 1 year. A guy like Tom Sula wasn't even given a long chance. And look, I never agreed with the hiring in the first place. Like, I'm sure a lot of people disagreed with it, but yeah, I don't know. You kind of need more than a year, don't you? Or are we at a point now where general managers are not patient, saying, "Hey, look, you got to win now"?
No, I don't think that's it necessarily. I think that in most situations, a guy will be given at least a couple years. I think what this does say is that maybe ownership had an exact person in mind, and that guy either said no or wasn't available last year, and so they threw in him because he was familiar with the system, and they knew it was a Band-Aid, it was a patch, and then after a 5-win season, it's easy to discard him. And the strange thing is, though, a lot of the so-called suitors for the position, guys that are throwing their names into the hat, guys that Jed York and Trent Baalke are throwing out as possible candidates are guys that were available last year. So that's what's a little confusing about the situation. But you got some crazy names getting thrown around. You got guys that haven't been in the NFL in a few years. Guys like we talked about last week. Mike Holmgren's still a candidate. Mike Shanahan's name was thrown out there today. Maybe they really want Chip Kelly, and they want, they didn't expect him last year, but maybe that's what they want. And there's just so many options out there. Sean Payton, lots of different guys, but that was what was the strange thing to me, was the fact that he was given 1 year, and it seemed like they were just waiting on their one guy. But to not have a decision made, to not have ever named that guy or called him out on their short list is a little strange to me. I don't think any other coaches need to be worried. I don't think this is a precedent. I don't think any coaches are going to get fired after one season, more than just few and far between.
Robert, go ahead, Robert.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you a different question off topic, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I think going back to the coaching, it depends on the situation, because I was speaking as a Bears fan. Mark Trespin, everyone saw how much of a tire fire the 2014 Bears were, for example, how much he lost the locker room, how really the lack of leadership to galvanize the team together, the culture completely broken. So it's really independent. I mean, I don't think defining every coach, having them on a 3-year plan. I know that's not how you meant it, but you have to cut the umbilical cord at some point when you realize that this isn't the guy. Like there still has to be some kind of progress shown, even if you fire a coach in a year. Like as Danny's talking about, his team's head coach Tom Sula. I mean, the Niners. I mean, they were decimated by injuries and retirements, but really they're just stuck in the mud with Tom Sula. It's not exactly like it's a bad hire, even if it wasn't a good hire in the first place. So every situation is independent, to me at least. There shouldn't be a set rule.
What do you think in terms of the 12 teams in the playoffs? Because you never know. If something just goes terribly wrong in the postseason, an owner and a general manager, or maybe the owner will tell both the GM and the head coach, hey, look, you didn't meet expectations, time to go. Last year we saw that with John Fox, who is, of course, now with the Chicago Bears. And look, the Broncos have, Peyton Manning more so, has had a history of early exits, and I guess John Fox just happened to be the victim of it there. Do you guys think that we will see any playoff or is there let me put it this way, I think this is a better question. Do you think there is a coach right now in the playoffs that is under pressure and still has to succeed in order to keep his job for 2016?
I got the best one, the most obvious one, Bill Belichick, obviously. No. Seriously, Marvin Lewis. Marvin Lewis had 0-6 in playoff games. Supremely talented roster. I know Andy Dalton isn't healthy, and they've sort of had a tailspin the last half of the season because it hasn't been. But I have a feeling if the Bengals don't pull it out against Pittsburgh, that maybe finally that there might have been too many one and dones for Cincinnati, and for I forget the name of the owner of the Bengals. Forgive me, but it might be too many one and dones.
Danny, do you think there's a team that in the playoffs where there's a coach that's kind of on the hot seat?
No, I don't think there is. Maybe earlier in the season you could have looked at a guy like Pete Carroll, but obviously the way they've performed the second half of the season, that's no longer a question. I don't really see anybody having a risk. I think they'll all be coaching again next year.
All right. Well, out of these teams,
you have to consider that all the teams.
What's that, Robert?
Uh-oh.
No, you go ahead because you started.
Okay. All right. Well, I was just gonna say, among these non-playoff teams, whether it's a team with a new head coach or maybe another team that's in their second or third year of trying to rebuild, which team do you think can make a surprise for the playoffs? Let's pick an AFC and an NFC team that we think can make a run next year and be a playoff team after not being one this season. I'll start with you on that one, Robert.
In the AFC, the most injured team, I think people forgot about them, but they pulled out an upset that almost ended their main rival season, the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Baltimore Ravens, losing Joe Flacco, A lot of injuries in the secondary. The offensive line ravaged by injuries. The front seven ravaged by injuries. Losing their starting running back halfway through the season. Having Mark Trestman as an offensive coordinator, which probably won't happen again next year. That's my designated shot. Yeah, I think the Ravens, John Harbaugh is too good of a coach. You saw how they finished the season, even with nothing meaningful to play for, how they have that winning culture in place, how they love playing for him, how they're still a talented team. They're going to recover. They're going to get healthy. They're in a tough division, but that hasn't bothered them before. I think the Ravens are a clear AFC team that can come back from the brink from this year. And then the NFC, I don't think it's biased for me to say. I mean, with the Bears have $70 million in cap space. They're well positioned in the draft. Jay Cutler just enjoyed a career season. They have a winning culture in place. They seem to be coming in play into a lot of young homegrown talent, ready to develop and become even better players, possibly some stars. The NFC North is in flux now with who knows how the Packers are going to be. So the Bears and the NFC for me. Ravens and Bears, rather.
What about you, Danny? Who are your two candidates?
In the AFC, I'm kind of looking at three teams, but I guess I'll pick one. I'm looking at Buffalo, who with they got Tyrod Taylor in place, who didn't even start the season as the starter, obviously, and they really got some pieces together. Sammy Watkins is looking like a beast. LaShawn McCoy had a great year, and he's only gonna continue that on next year. They got a solid defense. I think it kind of underperformed this year, but I think the pieces on defense are right. So I like the Bills. I like the Raiders. I think they got key pieces on both sides of the ball with Amari Cooper as a rookie and Derek Carr in his second year, and those guys are just going to continue and grow. Michael Crabtree had a monster year. They got Khalil Mack at linebacker over on D and some other key pieces on defense. And then one that I don't think will happen, but I'd love to see would be Jacksonville. The way they've those receivers there have emerged, and Blake Bortles stepped up, and he's been one of the top quarterbacks all season. So I'd like to see that one. I don't think it'll happen, but I'll say the Raiders in the AFC. They finished the year at 7-9, and I think they kind of drastically underperformed with what the talent levels they have. So I'll say the Raiders next year. NFC wise, besides the obvious Jim Bob Cooter offensively coached Detroit.
Oh, well, why did I not say the Lions?
I said besides that. One that surprised me is St. Louis. I actually picked them preseason to be to win that division. I was thinking the Seahawks had come down, and I didn't think Arizona would be as strong as they did. They obviously had quarterback issues. I thought, help me out, the guy that looks like Napoleon Dynamite, Nick Foles. I thought he would have a better year in St. Louis. He didn't. They have some struggles, so I'd like to say them. I don't think I can. NFC wise. Dallas, maybe?
Oh, yeah, that would have been a good one, too. Right.
Well, see, you're looking at the NFC East, and I've got to say, I'm looking at the Giants, and obviously they're going to have a new, and I failed to mention this, Tom Coughlin did step down from the Giants, but the thing about the Giants, they really have a talented offense. I think Eli Manning, even though he's had an up-and-down career, the guy still has 2 Super Bowl rings, and he's got some talent at that wide receiver position. I mean, this guy's got a lot of pass catchers, and the Giants did score a lot of points this year on offense. It's the defense that really held New York back from reaching its potential. So if the new head coach, whoever that's going to be, which, as we all know, there's always going to be speculation, and it's wide open for now, but whoever it ends up being, he's got to put an emphasis on defense, because there are some talented guys on that offense for New York. Now, the other New York team, the Jets, and I didn't mention this either, what a hard way to go out to finish the season. You pull off a stunner in overtime against the Patriots. Sure, there was that coin flip mishap, whatever happened with the Patriots, but still, you went out there and you defeated the Patriots in overtime, only to 1 week later lose to the Bills. And, of course, on the other side with the headset. That was the former head coach, Rex Ryan. So kind of a tough way to go out for the Jets. But I've got to say, I'm keeping an eye on the Raiders. You kind of mentioned it, Danny, but they have a lot of young talent on both sides of the football. On the offensive side, I love Derek Carr. I really love Latavius Murray, who was quietly in the top 5 for most of the season in rushing yards. He ended up finishing 6th, but also Amari Cooper, we'll touch on him in a bit, and also Michael Crabtree, who revived his career, struggling in San Francisco. I think he's in a better fit with Derek Carr. All very young guys, and on the defensive side, you've got Khalil Mack, who's just a monster. I think he's kind of like the J.J. Watt and Justin Houston of pass rushers right now, and then also David Amerson in that secondary, who he's really coming along. He had that pick 6 this past week, so I think a guy like him is going to be a cornerstone for that Oakland Raiders defensively. And, of course, let's not forget Charles Woodson. These guys, I'm sure, learned a lot from a legend who just played his last game this past week. It got a nice send-off in Week 16 when he got a win at home. So I'm picking those two teams as guys that'll come away as a threat in 2016.
Just to bolster my NFC pick, to keep in mind, Kevin White, explosive talent, didn't play this year. Bears will basically have 2 first-round picks playing next year. Just saying.
That's huge.
Just saying.
When that makes sense because it kind of feels like you have 2 first-round draft picks right now in your arsenal, and one of them already used. So that's always a big deal. That's always something to keep an eye on, especially first-round draft picks that didn't get to play much because maybe they were a backup, which is the case sometimes with some NFL players. So that's always pretty huge. And of course, you mentioned the case with White, but that'll be pretty huge for New York, or Chicago for 2016. But guys, let's move on to our awards. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we're going to hand out our NFL awards. MVP, Offensive and Defensive Player of the Year, Offensive and Defensive Rookies of the Year, Coach of the Year, and let's start with this one, which Danny will kick us off, the Comeback Player of the Year. We've got some pretty good candidates for this one. Who do you have winning this one, Danny?
As much as this is going to stir up controversy when I think it'll happen, just because of why he went away in the first place, I'm going to say Adrian Peterson.
Real quickly, sorry, just one quick thing. You mentioned why he went away. Let's remember one thing. Who won the Comeback Player of the Year award in 2010? He was away from dogfighting for a while.
Oh, Michael
Vick? Oh,
so,
yeah, he did.
I mean, if he wins it, look, Adrian Peterson's just as eligible. Go ahead.
No, that's right. And as much as I'd love to say Eric Berry of Kansas City, I think I like that story. That guy's obviously been quite the impressive player, and he's shown what he can do on the field. A year recovered from cancer. I think it'll be Adrian Peterson. He did it before with when he came back from his ACL injury, and he came and rushed for 2,100 yards in a season. This year he didn't have quite that many. He ended up the season with almost 1,500, but he led the NFL in rushing yards, a year removed from not playing at all last year. I think you give it to him. I think you got to give it to him. I argued last week for Carson Palmer as well, after having I think he only played 6 games in 2014. But out of those 3 guys being my top contenders, I think you give it to Adrian Peterson.
I think all 3 of us with this award, we agree it's not about why you were away. Like I said with the Mike Vick award, it's about how the returning players do on the field. I do want to ask both of you guys this, because the Eric Berry situation is so different, do you guys think that voters will maybe vote more with emotion on this one? Because I have a feeling some might.
I don't agree. I think Eric Berry might be more in line for something like NFL Man of the Year award, something that's more because he is active in the community, if I'm not mistaken, as well as him getting through his cancer battle. So you mentioned it yourself. I mean, his performance hasn't been in line as much as Peterson, but for some kind of award like that, which is still just as prestigious, that's what he will. That's what he'll be in position for.
Yeah, and look, Pro Football Focus, which people love their ratings, and I mentioned them here several times, Eric Berry's high up there as a safety. The top 5 safety, I don't know what he's ranked right now, but statistic-wise, Eric Berry doesn't have a lot, whereas Adrian Peterson, you can say he led the league in rushing and co-led the NFL in rushing touchdowns, so I think that's something that's going for him. So I do agree with Danny on that one. Nonetheless, why he went away, of course, none of us condone that. We don't need to get into the details. I think it's self-explanatory, but we've got to keep in mind with how that award's been handled in years past, more notably with the Mike Vick Award. But Coach of the Year, I've got to go with Ron Rivera. I think that's the clear-cut, easy one right there. He went 15-1, started 14-0 with a Panthers team that hasn't necessarily been purely dominant over the past few years, whereas this year they really got a lot of attention. And sure, look, you want to talk about the easy schedule that people are making a big deal out of? If they were able to fluke their way to this, then we should have seen it coming. They still impress me. Going 14-0 is no easy task in the NFL. You could have lost those last 2 games, and Ron Rivera still gets Coach of the Year because this is a team that really came out firing on all cylinders. And I think Andy Reid's a very viable candidate, and we touched on this last week, but I think with Ron Rivera's dominant start with the Panthers, I think you've got to give it to Ron Rivera. And this is a guy who's done a tremendous job with the Panthers. And we'll see if they can carry it over against bigger competition in the NFC. Robert, I'm going to go to you now for Defensive Rookie of the Year. Who do you have on your list?
I think this is pretty clear-cut. I think Marcus Peters tied for the league lead in picks with Reggie Nelson of the Bengals. Peters, one of the highest rated, as you mentioned, I mean, I don't know how much people put stock into Pro Football Focus, but one of the highest rated cover corners for Pro Football Focus. One of the bigger reasons that Kansas City went on that 10-game winning streak because he stabilized his play, really grew into the rookie he was. You have to note that he only dropped because of character issues or some kind of undocumented character issues. That he probably likely would have been a top 10 pick in last year's draft. And he really showed it on the field. And put himself in position as likely a future All-Pro corner for years to come. So, I mean, I can't even name other candidates. Maybe Darby from the Bills, but I can't think of anyone else. That's how great of a season Peters had.
Yeah, those are really the only 2 guys even worth mentioning for that award. And Peters, he did improve with his coverage as the season went on. In fact, the first defensive play for the Chiefs, it was a Marcus Peters pick, so he got going right away in his career. Danny, what about the rookie on the offensive side? Who gets your award for Offensive Rookie of the Year?
You know, you got a few options, I think. I got a clear-cut winner, but you look at guys like Todd Gurley, who had a great season as nobody really knew what that running back situation was going to be in St. Louis at the beginning of the year with Trey Mason coming off of a great year in 2014. He had a damn good year. You look at a guy in Arizona, and he probably didn't get enough playing time, but a guy like David Johnson, who just blew the wheels off of it, you know, towards the end of the year when he stepped right in. And then my winner is actually Amari Cooper. And a lot of people expected it, but he came out and he's got 1,000 plus yards, 1,070 yards, and he only had 6 touchdowns this year. But you know, he came out as the number 4 pick from Alabama, and a lot of people expected him to be the top wide receiver coming out of that class, and he definitely didn't disappoint. So he's my winner for Offensive Rookie of the Year. The way they're doing things in Oakland, like I just talked about in the last segment with David Carr, he's only going to get better, and with him getting better, Amari Cooper is going to step up and be the player that's really going to continue being great for years. So he's got that award in my book.
Well, in terms of veterans from the offensive and defensive side, starting with the defensive side, I'm going to go with a repeat on this one. I'm going to give it to J.J. Watt, and I think Josh Norman is another option for this award, certainly with the way he played as a quarterback. But J.J. Watt, man, and look, I'll be honest, I'm a little biased for pass rushers because I think they really are difference makers in football games. I think they can really, if they do something to the quarterback, get to their heads and just mess with them, that can change a game. It really can. And J.J. Watt's a guy who he's a big reason why Houston's been able to make this comeback and win the AFC South. You look at J.J. The thing that is so impressive about J.J. Watt, he's not a 4-3 defensive end. This guy's a 3-4 defensive end, and he's leading the league in sacks. There are not a lot of 3-4 defensive ends that are able to do the things that J.J. Watt does. I'd be scared if this guy played in a 4-3 system. I know his size is much different for him to be allowed to do that, but still, if he was a 4-3 pass rusher and if blockers are already occupied, I don't know how this guy would be stopped because he's able to do it as a 3-4 defensive end. So I've got to give it to J.J. Watt. Led the NFL with 17.5 sacks. Just a really impressive performance once again by J.J. Watt, and it goes to show how great of a defensive player he is, doing it again and again in his career. Robert, who do you have on the offensive side?
Carson Palmer, because he led the league's best coming off of his ACL tear, second ACL tear for the Arizona Cardinals, leading the league's best offense or best scoring offense and yardage wise. Fourth in passing yards, second in passing touchdowns, and then third in quarterback rating. He really came out firing. I mean, there wasn't really many bad games for the Cardinals. They're a loaded team offensively, talented-wise, and based off of Bruce, he's the perfect quarterback for Bruce Arians' system. So just slinging it around, a lot of deep passes, a lot of passes, testing the defense, stretching the defense, and it's paid off for him. He in all likelihood would have been a candidate last year if he didn't tear his ACL for Offensive Player of the Year. But considering how consistent he was and his health this year, I mean, in my mind, I think it's a lot. There's other guys in line like Brady, but Brady sort of tailed off at the end of the year as well. Running backs Adrian Peterson leading the league in rushing, but really Palmer, the only guy in tops in every league passing category, and his team is also 13-3 in the second seed in the NFC.
All right, Danny, I'm going to let you take the MVP award. Get us out of here for this segment. Who do you have taking home the MVP honor?
I think this one's pretty obvious. I'm going to give it to Cam Newton. The guy didn't quite reach the coveted 4,000-yard mark. Ended up, I think he was just outside the top 10 in terms of passing yards this year. But leading a team that went 14-0 to start the year, and then seal it and bring home the number one seed. And with the weapons he had Jonathan Stewart, who's been an average running back basically his whole career, splitting time with D'Angelo Williams basically. And Teddy Ginn, who we've talked about for a few weeks now, really impressing. And Greg Olson's really the star receiving option of that team. So I think with what he has to work with in terms of weapons with that offense and what he did with it, I don't think there's any competition. I think he's got it hands down.
Yeah, I think we all would agree with that. And listen, I think with any team that's going on a 12-0, 13-0, 14-0 run, sure, there are a lot of reasons for that happening, but everyone will say the quarterback. It's the quarterback who's getting the job done. If it's the Packers, everyone will talk about Aaron Rodgers and the job he's doing. So with a run like that the Panthers had, very impressive, and somewhat of a surprise that they dropped against the Atlanta Falcons. But Cam Newton did a lot to help the team get to that point right this season for Carolina. Let's move on, guys, to our picks. We got 4 games this week, all 4 playoff games, and let's start. We'll obviously go in order. Let's start with the Chiefs and the Texans. Both teams, great turnarounds mid-season. And I mean, look, my background's kind of obvious, who I'm rooting for. But if it's not obvious, then I don't know what the hell to say because
are you
it's fully red.
Cardinals fan?
Yeah, maybe a St. Louis Cardinals fan. But listen, Andy Reid and Bill O'Brien, give it up to these two guys because I think Bill O'Brien could have also been Coach of the Year candidate. These guys have taught us a lot, that it can be done, quote-unquote, overnight. Both teams were written off. We all wrote both those teams off mid-season. And next thing we know, the Chiefs go on a 10-game winning streak. The Texans find a way to win the AFC South. A note, though, the Chiefs have not won a playoff game in nearly 22 years. Coincidentally, did it last at Houston, but a different team in the Houston Oilers, not the Houston Texans. And the Texans themselves, they are 2-2 all-time in the postseason, have never lost in the wild card round. I've got to say, I'm nervous with this one after what happened a couple of years ago in Indianapolis with that 28-point lead because everyone did write off the Colts for that game as well. But hopefully the Chiefs can get it through this time. I have the Chiefs winning. They really do play well on the road, especially defensively. Their margin total victory, positive 91 in games on the road or away from Arrowhead this year if you include the neutral site game in London. So the Chiefs just happen to play really well away from Arrowhead Stadium, especially on the defensive side. And I think in a team like Houston that's had a quarterback convention this season, I think Kansas City can get the job done on the offensive side when the defense will do its job in limiting the Texans. So I've got the Chiefs winning in a two-score game. I'll say 28-14. What about you, Danny?
I'm going to take the Chiefs in this one for a lot of the reasons you said, but I mean they're on a 10-game winning streak. Houston snuck into the playoffs. They finished 9-7, but there was a question mark there as to who was going to win that division, who was going to get into the playoffs for most of the year, right? Like you said, we wrote them off a long time ago, like we did with the Chiefs when they were 1-5, but now they're 11-5 and they're the hottest team in football. They had a shaking up Jeremy Maclin last week, which could hurt, but we'll see how that shakes out. But after that Jamal Charles injury, the way Charkandrick West and Spencer Ware have stepped up, those guys have looked damn near unstoppable. They're kind of like Carolina in terms of their receivers, where they got some no-name guys and guys that you wouldn't expect to make big plays and have good games. And most of those guys who I still probably couldn't name three of their wide receivers have been playing really well. That defense has been solid. Like you mentioned earlier, they're going to have Holly and Justin Houston back, and so I think they're going to win this game. Probably 10 points. Call it 31-21.
Do you follow suit, Robert?
One fun nugget, because you guys already broke it down. Last two teams to finish on 10-game winning streaks to end the regular season, the 2012 Denver Broncos and the 2009 San Diego Chargers, both went 1-done in their first playoff game. So I'm sure Farzine loves that stat.
Oh, yeah.
But it won't happen here. The Chiefs are the better team, as you noted. Quarterback carousel, as Danny noted, just really well balanced, really well coached. I'm not gonna trust Brian Hoyer against Tom Ali, Justin Houston, and company. And the Texans' defense will help keep it close because they've been playing really well in the second half of the season. But Kansas City by a touchdown, 21-14.
Moving on to the Steelers and the Bengals, and this is kind of interesting. The Chiefs, as I mentioned, haven't won a playoff game in 22 years. The Bengals haven't won a playoff game in 26 years. And both AFC games are happening on the same night. I don't know if the NFL wanted to create a narrative that, oh, hey, the Chiefs and the Bengals both won for the first time in 20-plus years. I don't know. Maybe that's just a coincidence, but I do find it interesting that the Chiefs and Bengals are playing on the same night, and neither of them have won a playoff game in more than 20 years. Nonetheless, Andy Dalton will not play in this game, so they're going to go with A.J. McCarron again, the young guy who essentially, I mean, this is his rookie year continuing on. The Steelers' passing attack, major threat. I touched on this last week, and Danny, you brought it up a little bit on this podcast. I really do think they have the best offense in the AFC right now. Unfortunately, I think that Bengals drought for the last time they won a playoff game, I think it's going to go over to 27 years. I just think as good as that Bengals defense is, I don't think it's good enough to stop that Steelers offense. When I saw Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown do to Chris Harris, who, in my opinion, is the best cornerback in the NFL, that itself is scary. If the Steelers can do that to Denver, they can do it to anybody in the AFC. So I think the Steelers are going to cruise and win this one in a one-sided game. I think it's going to be a 28-7 game with Pittsburgh coming out on top. What about you, Robert?
You would expect me to go with the Steelers, but the Bengals are going to break the drought. Both teams in the same night. The NFL gets its wish. No, I agree with you. Pittsburgh's offense is really, really explosive, the best in the league, even despite not having Le'Veon Bell most this season. But their defense, the 30th ranked passing defense, and normally you would hate a backup quarterback like A.J. McCarron going into it, but I mean, they were exploited a few weeks ago by Ryan Mallett, who almost threw for 300 yards against them. That's a red flag to me. I think the Bengals would have an excellent offensive coordinator, Hugh Jackson. They're going to put together a great game plan for McCarron to take apart a really vulnerable defense, and I think the Bengals come out of it. I'm not as in love with the Steelers as a whole as most people are. I think it's a close one, but I think the Bengals pull it out 24-21.
You said the Bengals are going to win?
The Bengals will win, yes.
Okay, all right. Sorry, you cut out for a second. All right, so Danny, go ahead and break the tie for us. Who do you have?
I think this is going to be a real close game. Like you said, Andy Dalton's out, but the way A.J. McCarron has stepped up and shown that he is at least serviceable in that offensive system. They have A.J. Green, which certainly helps. That guy can, as we saw last week, jump up and catch about any ball that's thrown his direction. You got some dump-off options. You got a guy like Giovanni Bernard, who's possibly one of the quickest guys in the NFL who can cut and juke, and it's nice to have that outlet, especially with a quarterback that doesn't have a lot of NFL experience, and he might be more aching like we've seen with other inexperienced quarterbacks to do quick dump off passes, but he's always got that long shot option in AJ Green. Their defense has looked great, and it's going to be against like we said, one of the best offenses in the league. I mean, Antonio Brown finished the year with, I think, 8, maybe 9 receptions short of the all-time season record, 132 receptions or something like that. Had 15 last week. That guy just seems unstoppable. And the way Marcus Wheaton has really stepped up in that system has been really impressive to me too. They have a stable of receivers there that you could put up against any team in the NFL. And with Ben Roethlisberger looking healthy and strong the last few weeks, I think it'll be a really close game. But I'm going to break the tie with the Steelers, 28-24.
Going over to the Sunday games, the NFC games for the NFL this weekend in the wild card round. Let's start with the Seahawks at the Vikings. Of course, the Vikings defeated the Packers, so they will be playing at home. Oddly enough, if the Packers won that game, the Vikings and the Packers were going to meet same exact location for a rematch, which I believe that happened in 2009 or 2010. I think 3 teams played in Week 17, and they played each other again just 1 week later in the playoffs. But not going to happen this time around. Marshawn Lynch reports saying he should be ready to go. Adrian Peterson, of course, he's been a monster this year. We've touched on that already a couple of times. So this could be a game where it's going to showcase 2 very good running backs. But the thing about Marshawn Lynch, he hasn't played since Week 10 against Arizona in a very close game where the Seahawks lost that game by just by 1 possession. But to me, overall, I think this is a game where it's going to come down to who the better running back is. And mentioning Marshawn Lynch being out for a while, I think he may lose a step or two. As great as he is, I think he's still going to have a good game, but not a monster Marshawn Lynch game that we're all used to seeing. And who knows? Maybe we see the beast mode come out postseason mode this week against the Vikings. But I think Minnesota's going to be able to handle it. I think Teddy Bridgewater, a lot's going to be on his shoulders, how he handles the ball, if he can take care of the football, avoid turnovers, and just continue to do his thing. I think Minnesota's going to move on to win, and I think Seattle's nice comeback story is going to come to an end, and for the first time in a couple of years, they will not represent the NFC. I think it's going to come down to who the better running back is, and I think that's going to be AP in this game. So I'm going to go with the Vikings in this one. I'll say somewhat low scoring. I'll say 17-14 Minnesota at home. Danny?
I don't think we could be further from our predictions here. I think Seattle's just going to destroy the Vikings. I think the Seattle defense has been looking great. I think they shut down AP. I don't think he gets 100 yards, might not score. I think that defense will certainly hold Minnesota to not very many points. I think Marshawn Lynch will have a big game. He's not going to go crazy, but I think he scores a touchdown and has a above average game, especially as long as it's been since he's played last. But I think Russell Wilson continues to do what he's done. I think those guys tear apart that Minnesota secondary, and I got the Seahawks winning big. I'm going to say 38-18.
All right, it was Danny last time. Robert, you're going to have to break the tie this time. Who do you have?
And I'm on the same boat. I couldn't be farther from you, Farzine, and I'm on the same boat as Danny. I mean, it's going to be – I mean, Minnesota will be more prepared. They have some film on Seattle over the blowout they had in November. But Seattle's just a better team. A stat that's lost, Teddy Bridgewater threw for, 79 yards in their NFC North leading – or NFC North win – or NFC North title win over Green Bay. I don't see how he's going to have success against that Seattle secondary, that Seattle defense. The Minnesota offensive line still isn't that great, so he's going to be pressured. As Danny said, then they're locking on Adrian Peterson, so in turn he'll have less success. Russell Wilson, I don't see slowing down necessarily. They have that offense running on all cylinders. It's a stretch to say if they'll represent the NFC, but Seattle's certainly in position to be that dark horse team and move on and play Carolina in the next round. Seattle big, 31-10.
All right, well, if we were far apart on this pick, I think we might be even further apart on this next pick. Washington playing host to the Green Bay Packers. And we haven't touched on Washington a whole lot. We didn't really touch on that division much other than how bad it was. But let's take a moment for just a second with Kirk Cousins. And look, I get that a lot of his games against other bad NFC teams, especially within that division. But look, the Washington Redskins, I mean, this is the backup quarterback who had to come in and kind of a crazy season, got the job done for the Washington Redskins. Just a couple notes on him this year. He's in the top 10 in passing yards. In fact, he's actually 10th in that category, which a lot of casual fans may not even have noticed that. In terms of passing touchdowns, if I can find it real quickly, he was just outside of the top 10. 29 touchdown passes, 11 interceptions. Not bad for a guy who had to fill in, had a 101.6 quarterback rating, one of the best in the National Football League. Whereas you look at the Packers, and I think the Packers, they've had probably the craziest second half after a great first half, starting 6-0 and only to finish 4-6 after the bye week. This is a Packers team that's really slipped. Sure, they had that nice win against the Lions that some Packers fans are probably still pumping their chest about, but for the most part, this Redskins team, they enter the playoffs with a 4-game winning streak and have won 6 of their last 8. And I saw a post on the Washington Post. The Washington Post, they post things. What do you know? But I saw their headline asking a very intriguing question that a lot of people laughed at. Would you rather have for the future Aaron Rodgers or Kirk Cousins? Now, I'll say this. I'd rather have Aaron Rodgers. I think he's more proven. He's done it in a longer period of time. But look, a guy like Kirk Cousins, he's done a lot this year to help that Redskins team come back. And I think Washington, defensively, they've been able to do some things. On the offensive side, you've got a little bit of talent there, too, to work with. But I think Washington at home, especially with Kirk Cousins and the talent he's showcased, I think he's going to be able to prove himself against this Packers defense, kind of similar to what you said about the Packers defense a few weeks ago, Robert. I think this Packers defense is going to break against this Redskins offense led by Kirk Cousins, and I think we're going to see an upset here. Granted, it's at Washington, and a lot of people are probably still picking the Packers. I think the Redskins come away with this one in I'll say somewhat high-scoring game. I think they'll both be in the 20s, and I think it's going to be Washington that comes away with the win and will advance.
I don't think we're far apart at all on this. I don't think it's an upset. I think Washington's going to pull it off. 2 stats of note: Kirk Cousins led the second half of the season. Who led the NFL in passer rating? Kirk Cousins. And then with the Packers haven't lost all 3 divisional home games at Lambeau Field in one season since the 1960s. So something is seriously broken. I was watching on Sunday night. Aaron Rodgers, even when he has time, there just seems to be something off. He seems to have that Jay Cutler or David Carr syndrome when both had bad offensive lines, where you get jittery and you're off timing even when you have, because you're not used to being in rhythm. You're not used to working around in the pocket. And Washington's defense, I mean, they're not the best, but they seem more than well equipped to exploit that. I think it's a shootout. I think the Packers sort of get their offense going a little bit, but Washington 34, Green Bay 31.
All right, Danny, get us out of here. Last pick of the evening.
We're either all going to be right or we're all going to sink on the ship together and go down that way because, Kirk Cousins has really impressed most everybody this year. He came out and he threw for 4,200 yards this year. Washington won that division. Like you said, they won 6 out of their last 7 or 8 games, and Green Bay, as they're well documented, have just kind of been falling off a cliff the last half of the season. So, they still have weapons there in Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers is still Aaron Rodgers. He can still, show up whenever he wants to, seemingly, but he really hasn't the whole second half of the season. I think Jordan Reed is going to be a huge player in this game. I think that guy's a freak athlete and a nightmare matchup for about anybody. I think that connection there is going to be huge this game. Kirk Cousins is going to have a monster game, and the Redskins are going to win 31-21.
How about a pre-playoff Super Bowl pick, guys?
Ooh, I've got to say, And I've been on this offense, and I said this last week. If this team was able to find a way to get in, I think they're going to be dangerous. I think Pittsburgh can go out there and make a lot of noise. Listen, the AFC we all agree is wide open. But if there's a team that from a fan standpoint, as a Chiefs fan, if I did not want to face, it's the Steelers. I was really hoping the Jets would have finished off the Buffalo Bills, but couldn't. And the Steelers were able to get in with the win, taking advantage of New York's loss. I think this Steelers team is going to represent the AFC, and I think whoever they face, probably the Cardinals at this point, that'd be my NFC prediction. I think the Steelers can top Arizona, especially without I'm forgetting the safety's name who they recently lost. I can't remember his name, but when you have,
Tyrann Matthew, yes.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, Matthews, yeah, thank you. With that hole right there, I think that's going to be. I think Arizona could have used that as safety help. I don't want to get too much into the X's and O's, but they could have used that as safety help to stop a top-notch wideout like Antonio Brown. But I think the Steelers, that's another wide-open hole for them. I still think Arizona can get through and do some special things in this postseason, but I think it's going to be Pittsburgh that's really going to surprise us all and win a Super Bowl as a wild card, a six-seed wild card, that is.
Danny?
I've been thinking about it. I think Denver takes it in the AFC. I think that defense is so strong that they can shut down about anybody. And the weapons that they have on offense, at running back at least, have been coming on lately that weren't really showing up at the beginning of the year. C.J. Anderson's had a strong last 4 or 5 games. They still got Ronnie Hillman to help him out. They got excellent receivers that have kind of underperformed to an extent with Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders. They got some weapons, and Peyton Manning's going to show up, right? He's going to play, and you don't know which Peyton Manning you're going to see, but playoff Peyton Manning at this stage of his career, I guess, can be a pretty scary thing. That guy can tend to take over games. So they're my AFC pick, and I'm going to say Carolina in the NFC with the MVP that I called out earlier, and the way those guys have just been cruising through this entire season. I think that continues in Carolina and Denver, and I'm going to give it to Denver.
Real quick question. I know you're a gambling guy. Do you know what? I mean, is there like a betting line or something out there?
I haven't seen one yet, actually.
Well, no, I was gonna ask. I mean, because is it possible to put money down and say that you think Kirk Cousins or Spencer Ware could be the Super Bowl MVP? Because I think those might be the two craziest names for potential Super Bowl MVPs.
I'm sure there probably is somewhere. You could probably pick that.
See, you could have put down $20 last week. You mentioned $20 for the Colts, and you could have came away with $30,000. I'll put $20 down for Spencer Ware.
There you go.
I'll put $20 down on Brian Hoyer. Just kidding. I wouldn't. That's a loss of money.
Who are your two teams, Robert?
In the NFC, I talked about how I like the Seahawks. I think they're moving well. Or rather, they're a really hot team. They're going to beat the Vikings. They're going to exploit a Carolina team that they have one defensive weakness, and that's the secondary. Charles Tillman, a starter for them, tore his ACL in their season finale against the Bucs, and that's, I think, a mitigating factor against Seattle, whose passing game is really hot with Russell Wilson. But Seattle ultimately fall to Arizona in the NFC title game. Still, even despite the loss of Tyrann Mathieu, Arizona has been the best team in the NFC in my mind, most talented rather. They don't really have any weaknesses. They're loaded at receiver. They have a fantastic offensive line. They have a great front seven. Their secondary is still supremely talented without Mathieu. Carson Palmer, as we noted, one of the best offensive players in the league this year. And they're going to beat their rival, quote unquote. I think that's the new NFC grudge match. And then the AFC teams are the team everybody seems to be forgetting about because they sort of haven't finished the season well, but they haven't been healthy either. The Patriots, they're going to get back Julian Edelman. They're going to get back Chandler Jones. They're going to get back Jamie Collins. They're going to have everything in tune. They're going to have all their. They're going to be as healthy as possible with the bye week, which is a significant benefit always. And they're going to win the AFC, or they're going to win a relatively wide-open AFC. And in my mind, the Cardinals captured their first Super Bowl title. Again, most complete team, equipped to sort of attack a Patriots secondary that has its weaknesses. That the defense has fallen off a little bit compared to last year. Still playing pretty well. Malcolm Butler showing off as number one corner. But the Cardinals will capture their first Super Bowl in franchise history.
All right, there you go. There you have it. It was a pretty fun show to do this season. I thought this was also another good podcast for us to do here. Hopefully we get Nate back. Like I said, he's been out of action for a bit lately, but I'd love to hear his New England takes here. So hopefully we can have him on the podcast soon because New England will play next week for sure. We know that much. So hopefully we'll have Nate back. But nonetheless, we'll all be back. This podcast will be back next week. So a big thanks to Robert and Danny for joining me here, and a big thanks to all of you guys for listening to us throughout the season. We'll, of course, continue to do this throughout the playoffs and also into the off season. So playoffs coming in right now. A majority of us went Chiefs, Steelers, Seahawks, and Redskins. So we'll see if those picks come true. Be sure you guys keep in touch with us. Real quickly, let's go around the board. Robert, what's your Twitter handle?
At Zigzags82.
And Danny?
At DannyFresh421.
All right, and be sure you guys do follow the No Coast Bias account as well on Twitter. You guys can also follow me at Farzine21. All right, guys, big thanks for doing this podcast with me, and a big thanks to everyone for listening. Until then, we'll talk to you next week, breaking down the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. Take care. Enjoy your weekend.